Welcome back. Many Americans believe their country is exceptional. It's a belief that the U.S. has a unique place in human history and is destined to spread freedom and democracy around the world. So how does this apply to 51% of its population, which is women? Joining me now to discuss this is Cristina Finch, Managing Director of the Women's Human Rights Program at Amnesty International USA. She previously served as Senior Counsel for Human Rights Campaign. I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Why don't we start with human trafficking? It's estimated it's a $32 billion industry. It's obviously underground. Industrialized nations pushing this in many instances. Why hasn't the U.S. been effective in tackling that issue?
Well, the U.S. has taken certain measures to try to tackle human trafficking, and there's more to be done. But one step that they took just recently was the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, also reauthorized the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is a key piece of legislation to help combat human trafficking. So the United States is taking steps both with that act and providing survivors with services, criminal enforcement of trafficking laws, and then also new steps by USAID, for example, to combat trafficking globally.
But no simple solutions for something this complex.
There's no simple solutions. It's both a criminal justice issue and a survivor, making sure survivors have services.
Let's talk a little bit about the media for a moment, and they always say don't bite the hand that feeds you, but the media has been in the limelight of late. Of course, we hear these music tunes, the words pimp and hoe thrown around rather liberally. Popular media, there's a lot of sexuality. What does this do, and what should the media be doing?
So reinforcement of gender stereotypes in the media is certainly an issue. Just recently, if you saw the coverage around Steubenville, Ohio, and that case, there was a lot of victim blaming.
And for those who aren't familiar with it, the Steubenville case is a rape case. Kind of outline what it was that happened there.
So a young woman was at a party and had several men, actually, she had something to drink, and several men took advantage of her, raped her, carried her around naked, and instead of what they should have done, which was get her some help. And so the media coverage around that was very irresponsible in some ways. There was victim blaming, there was talk of, oh, this has really ruined these young men's lives. Well, what about the survivor? What about her life? And that's where we should be focusing, not talking about, this is something that just somehow happened. There were responsible parties, and they were brought to justice.
Does music contribute to it, though? Does the promiscuity, the things that we see on television, does that contribute at all to the problem?
I mean, I do think culturally, when you're reinforcing gender stereotypes and talking about women in a derogatory manner, that all has an effect. So that is definitely an issue.
Let's, I showed you this ad. We're going to put it up on the screen. This is an ad for Ford. It's in India. It's since been yanked, but it shows former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, 3 women tied up in the trunk. We know sexist ads exist and have for some time. I'm sure this does not come as a surprise to you. In 1980, researchers from the United Nations suggested that repeated exposure to sexist ad is contributing factor to negative behavior, including violence against women and sexual harassment. How serious a problem is this? When are big businesses going to get it?
Well, violence against women is one of the world's most pervasive human rights abuses. I mean, ironically, 1 in 3 women worldwide have been raped, beaten, or coerced into sex. And so in the photo that you showed me, there's 3 women in the back of that car, ironically. So actions need to be taken to stop the violence, and reinforcement of stereotypes and negative portrayals of women, particularly around violence, are part of the problem.
When you see an ad like that, what goes through your mind?
Unfortunately, I see things like this all too often. And what goes through my mind is that there are concrete steps that governments can take to stop the violence.
Let's talk a little bit about domestic violence against women. A lot of times when we think about this here in the West, we think about, maybe the Middle East, South Asia. It's a problem that's happening here in the United States, as you well know. Describe it for us.
Absolutely. It's a huge problem in the United States as well as globally. In the United States, the statistic is about 1 in 5 women are subject to domestic violence during their lifetime. And what we see when we look at particular groups, particularly indigenous women, is that rates of sexual violence are very high. So we're very excited about the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, for example, to take steps to combat that.
I worked in Tampa, Florida before I moved here to Washington, D.C., and I remember interviewing a woman who had been abused repeatedly, a very attractive woman, upper middle class, and she told me during the interview that her mother-in-law said, look, you just keep this under, and it was apparent that the mother-in-law had also been abused. That's another thing that we see. It's all underground, isn't it?
Well, sometimes it can be. There are certain steps that we would like to see taken to bring it to light, but it's a human rights abuse. It is illegal. And so people should be coming forward, and we want a criminal justice response as well to help solve this.
Equal Rights Amendment, back in the 1970s, passed by both houses of Congress, then kind of fell flat when it came out to the states. There still is this income inequality out there, which is prevalent. What needs to be done to address that?
Well, certainly what we see now is that there's not only income inequality between men and women in the United States, but also with racial minorities. So it's a compounded problem. For example, if you're a black woman in the United States, you make significantly less than not only a black man, but a white woman or a white man. And so we'd actually like to see concrete steps. There's actions that both the government and companies can take to make sure that there's pay equality across not only like-minded jobs, but jobs that are traditionally, quote-unquote, women's work.
Malcolm Gladwell in his book talked about CEOs, and that I think it was some astronomical amount, 86% were not just white men, but 6'2" and above, which seemed outrageous. But the fact of the matter is only about 4% of the CEOs are women. When do you turn that around?
It can't start soon enough. Only 20% of the United States Congress is women. That also needs to change.
So what needs to happen there? How do the glass ceiling, it's been talked about probably for as long as you've been doing what you're doing. Absolutely. How does it get shattered?
So I think that there needs to be more women's empowerment. We need to see women being mentored by both men and women. We need pay equality, and we need women's political participation. We need more women running for office and holding office. And
what holds them back from doing it, do you think?
Well, I think there's a variety of factors. I've looked into the issue of women's empowerment and women's political participation, and there's actually a lot of gender stereotyping, negative reactions by male politicians that continue to hold them back. We saw that in Michigan last year when a woman legislator was banned from the floor because she mentioned women's body parts.
I don't want to make this like a solely negative broadcast because there have been some progressive steps here in the United States. I mean, when you think about the last 5 secretaries of state, 3 of them have been women. They've held the job with distinction and done a great job. We've seen more and more first ladies getting involved in the political process, having more influence, with Hillary Clinton obviously coming to mind, Michelle Obama, and even now in China, Peng Lian just went to Russia. And people are saying, oh, she can be this iconic first lady. So and that's kind of rare in China. Are these women really kind of helping to push this issue, do you think? And can they?
Well, I think anytime that you see women holding powerful positions and speaking out, that it helps push the issue. So I think not only wives of politicians have a role to play in, presenting positive role models, but the male politicians as well, and the female politicians.
Doesn't hurt if they're whispering in the morning, hey, you ought to get moving on this, right?
We have seen that happen, yes.
Cristina Finch, thank you so much for coming in. Certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.